Don't worry, Claire. Your knight in shining armor is here.
Nope. That terrible line wasn't even funny. I'm pissed. Happy Halloween, ladies and gentlemen, and here we are with the final review for Resident Evil month, and probably the final Resident Evil review at least for a while. I've done like 9 of these, but for now, we are ending Resident Evil month with, in my opinion, the most underrated Resident Evil game in the entire franchise, and one of my personal favorites. So Resident Evil Code Veronica, or Code Veronica X if you have a PS2, came out in 2000, and this game was originally supposed to be Resident Evil 3. And it's honestly quite easy to tell, considering that Resident Evil 3 takes place around the same time as Resident Evil 2, while Code Veronica picks up literally just a few months after the Raccoon City incident. But for some reason, this game, a game that is a part of the mainline Resident Evil timeline, is completely overlooked, not just by fans, but by Capcom themselves. And for the longest time, I wondered why that was the case. Until I remembered that it was originally exclusive to the Sega Dreamcast. Okay, it all makes sense now. So in this game, you play as Claire Redfield. And do you remember the whole plot point about Claire looking for her brother Chris in Resident Evil 2? Man, it's so crazy that that plot point never got resolved. Oh well, I guess it'll be one of the few unsolved mysteries in the Resident Evil franchise. That is the plot of this game! Claire Redfield finds intel on her brother's whereabouts at one of Umbrella's secret laboratories in Europe. So like a normal sister, she infiltrates the entire base by herself and takes out anyone that stands in her way. If Resident Evil 4 was Leon's peak, then Resident Evil Code Veronica was Claire's peak. This was a woman driven to find her brother no matter the stakes. But eventually, Claire does get captured and sent to Rockford Island. And during this time, the T-virus gets released, and the warden basically says to hell with it and releases Claire because the island's fucked anyway. So now Claire's goal is to find her brother and escape Rockford Island. Now a lot of people say that Resident Evil 4 was the start of Resident Evil leaning more towards action, but those who say that have never played this game. From the first cutscene, it immediately feels like you are watching a Mission Impossible movie. Just like Resident Evil 4, Code Veronica leans a lot more towards action, but it doesn't get in the way of the horror. There's always this sense of dread with each new area you come across, because you never know what's going to be on the other side. And I know the previous Resident Evil games did this as well, but this game really puts the fear in your chest, with the slow walking as you hear the sound of your heartbeat, taking the next step into the new area only to be greeted with D.I.J. the Rat. There's just something about the tone of dread in this game that really resonated with me more than other Resident Evil titles. And I think what perfectly encapsulates this tone are the main villains of this game, the Ashford twins. Behind Wesker, the Ashford twins are my favorite villains in the Resident Evil franchise. Because while every other villain comes off as big, grotesque, or a show-off, the Ashford twins are creepy without having to try. Though I guess the incestual undertones don't help. Alfred Ashford comes off as this very privileged asshole, who is honestly a very entertaining villain. Because unlike the villain in Resident Evil 0, Alfred is supposed to be a little silly.
I'll be sure to keep you entertained before I dispose of you.
Though it makes sense why they made Alfred the goofy-ass aristocrat, because they made Alexia the scary one. Alfred might be human, but Alexia is without a doubt a demon in human skin. Those eyes are not human. From the moment she is released from her tank, she brought off this unsettling aura that I have never felt from another Resident Evil villain. Even her transformation into a monster is so different than any other monster in the series, making it feel beautiful, yet terrifying at the same time. She honestly feels more like a Dark Souls monster more than a Resident Evil monster, and I love the villain-on-villain encounter between her and Wesker.
You're responsible for the creation of the T. Veronica virus. And now the only existing sample is in your body. I want it. Now!
You want it? You are not worthy of its power!
What I also love about this game is that on top of an interesting main story, we get an interesting side story as well, with Albert Wesker infiltrating the base trying to obtain a sample of the T. Veronica virus. And it is the first time we see Albert Wesker after his death in Resident Evil 1.
I'm going to let you live a little longer.
How was this not Resident Evil 3? The plot for this game not only ties together the shit that happened in Resident Evil 2, but the shit that happened in Resident Evil 1.
Sure, I'm not human anymore. But just look at the power I've gained.
And that's why it bothers me so much that Capcom keeps overlooking such an important title in this series. Now that being said, the game is not perfect, and these two complaints are the main reasons for why we need a remake for this game. Since I'm on the topic of story and characters, allow me to introduce you to my biggest complaint in the story, with Steve. Now on paper, this should have been a good character, because out of all of the characters in this game, he gets the most development. But the only thing his backstory did for me was make him go from being hateable to being tolerable. And do you want to know why that's the case? Because someone at Capcom thought it was a good idea to give this man the most whiniest bitch boy voice imaginable.
You'll just end up disappointed if you rely on others. Believe me, I know.
Who the hell thought this voice was a good choice for this character? I could maybe understand this if the goal from the beginning was to annoy the players with this character. But if your purpose was to make him annoying, then why give him all of this development in the first place? And on top of all of that development, he is the closest thing we have to a main love interest for Claire Redfield in the entire series.
Don't worry, Claire. Your knight in shining armor is here.
Nope. That terrible line wasn't even funny, I'm pissed. Maybe Chris was right, where the fuck is Leon? But like I said in the beginning, they could have made this character work if he didn't have such a punchable voice. And the main reason I say this is because Darkside Chronicles did him so much better.
What about you? What's your story?
It's dumb. You don't want to know.
Just tell me.
I didn't even do anything. Some other jackass screwed up. Landed the two of us in here.
I do not consider Darkside Chronicles to be a perfect retelling of Code Veronica at all. That being said, it did give us this perfect ass shot of Claire. But the one thing Darkside Chronicles does extremely better than Code Veronica is Steve. And then we have my second complaint of the game, which is the gameplay. The gameplay for Code Veronica is the tank control style that I am not a big fan of. And honestly, out of all the games with this style of gameplay, this one might be my least favorite. I had my challenging moments in the other games, sure, but I died in this game more than any other Resident Evil game. And I died a lot in Resident Evil 4. There were so many cheap ass moments in this game where an enemy just one-shot killed me. And it's not even the enemies that kill me, it's usually the environment. I don't know what the developer's one-shot kill fetish was for this game, but there are way too many things in this game that could immediately kill me for my liking. That being said, I did like the unique monsters in this game, and it kind of made up for the difficulty in this game, such as the Banshee and the Nosferatu. But what really makes this game for me more than all of the Resident Evil games is, in my opinion, the best soundtrack in the entire Resident Evil series. The soundtrack for Resident Evil Code Veronica X is beautiful. I brought up the tone of dread in this game, but there's also this tone of sadness that lingers throughout the game as well. And I think they would have leaned a lot more towards that sadness if they wrote Steve better and gave him a new voice. But with all that said, Resident Evil Code Veronica gave us a fun story, phenomenal villains, but does fall short in the gameplay department and Steve, which is why I truly believe if there was any game that could benefit from a remake, it would be this game. I truly believe that if this game was to get a remake, it would be considered one of the greatest Resident Evil games of all time. So with all that said, my final verdict for Resident Evil Code Veronica X is the silver Seal of approval.